The spotlight blazed. 70,000 people held their breath. Elvis Presley stood center stage, microphone trembling in his hand. The words to "Love Me Tender," a song he'd sung 10,000 times, simply vanished from his mind. For the first time in his legendary career, the king of rock and roll was completely, utterly lost. But in that moment of vulnerability, something extraordinary happened. Something that would define Elvis Presley not as a performer, but as a human being. Something that, decades later, would be remembered as the most beautiful moment in music history. How did we get here? How did the world's biggest superstar find himself standing speechless in front of thousands? And what happened next that made grown men cry and changed Elvis forever? Let me take you back to where it all began. Houston, Texas. December 1976. The Astrodome was buzzing with anticipation. Elvis was in the middle of his most grueling tour schedule yet, 27 cities in 31 days. His manager, Colonel Parker, had booked him relentlessly, pushing the king harder than ever before. But this wasn't just any concert. Word had spread through the hospital networks of Texas. Children's hospitals, cancer wards, pediatric units, they all knew. Tonight, Elvis had personally invited over 200 sick children to attend the show as his special guests. 8-year-old Tommy Martinez sat in his wheelchair in the special section, right at the edge of the stage. He'd been battling leukemia for 3 years. The chemotherapy had taken his hair, weakened his small body, but it couldn't touch his spirit. His hospital bracelet was still on his wrist, and in his lap, he clutched a handmade card with shaky crayon letters. "Thank you, Elvis. You make me brave." Tommy's mother, Maria, sat beside him, fighting back tears. The doctors had given them the news just 2 weeks ago. The treatments weren't working anymore. They had maybe 3 months left together. When the hospital social worker had offered them tickets to see Elvis, Maria knew this might be Tommy's last chance to see his hero. Elvis had been preparing backstage, but something was different that night. His usual pre-show energy seemed scattered. The pressure of the tour, the exhaustion, the prescription medications that helped him push through the pain, it was all catching up with him. "You all right, E?" asked Red West, his longtime bodyguard and friend. Elvis stared at himself in the mirror, adjusting the collar of his white jumpsuit. "Just tired, Red. Real tired." But he walked onto that stage with the same magnetic presence that had made him a legend. The crowd erupted as the familiar opening chords of "CC Rider" filled the massive dome. Elvis moved with his characteristic swagger, hips swaying, voice powerful and soulful. For the first hour, everything was perfect. He powered through "Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel" and "All Shook Up." The audience was mesmerized, hanging on every note, every movement. But then something began to shift. Elvis started glancing toward the section where the sick children sat. His eyes kept returning to little Tommy, who was trying so hard to clap along despite his weakness. During "Can't Help Falling in Love," Elvis's voice cracked slightly. Not from vocal strain, from emotion. He could see the hope in those children's eyes, the way they looked at him like he could somehow make everything okay. Between songs, he knelt at the edge of the stage, closer to where Tommy sat. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Elvis saw something that shattered him, pure, uncomplicated love from a child who was fighting the biggest battle of his young life. That's when it happened. The band started the opening notes of "Love Me Tender," Elvis's signature ballad, the song that had made him famous, the song he could sing in his sleep. Elvis lifted the microphone to his lips, opened his mouth, and nothing. The words were gone. Completely, utterly gone. The 70,000 people in the Houston Astrodome fell silent. The band continued playing, waiting for Elvis to come in with the vocals. But he just stood there, microphone in hand, staring at little Tommy in his wheelchair. Time seemed frozen. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive space. Elvis stopped the music with a gesture. The silence was deafening. And then, in front of everyone, he did something no superstar had ever done before. He walked to the edge of the stage. Not to his security team, not to his manager, but directly to where Tommy sat in his wheelchair. "Hey there, young man," Elvis said, his voice picking up over the arena's sound system as he knelt down. "What's your name?" Tommy's eyes went wide. "Tommy, sir." "Tommy Martinez." "Tommy Martinez?" Elvis repeated, as if tasting the name. "That's a strong name. You look like a fighter to me, Tommy." The audience watched in stunned silence as Elvis reached into his pocket and pulled out his personal TCB necklace. Taking care of business. The symbol he wore every single day. "I want you to have something, Tommy," Elvis said, placing the necklace around the boy's thin neck. "This is my lucky charm. I've never taken it off, not once in 5 years. But I think you need it more than I do." Tommy's mother gasped, tears streaming down her face. The entire arena was dead silent, witnessing something unprecedented in the history of live performance. Elvis stood up and turned back to his band. "Fellas," he said, his voice carrying across the silent dome, "I forgot the words to my own song. But you know what? Maybe that's okay. Maybe tonight isn't about my words. Maybe tonight is about something bigger." He walked back to center stage, looked out at the thousands of faces staring at him, and made a decision that would define his legacy forever. "Tommy," he called out, "do you know the words to Love Me Tender?" The boy nodded eagerly, his face lighting up despite his obvious exhaustion. "Then you sing it with me, son. You be my partner tonight." And that's when the miracle happened. That's when Elvis Presley became more than just the king of rock and roll. That's when he became something infinitely more precious. Subscribe and comment if you want to see how this moment changed everything. Because what happened next is the most beautiful thing you'll ever witness. What followed wasn't just a song. It was a moment of pure human connection that transcended entertainment, transcended celebrity, transcended everything that usually separates us from each other. Elvis started singing "Love Me Tender" again, but this time, he sang it differently. Softer. More intimate. His eyes never left Tommy's face as the boy, summoning all his strength, sang along from his wheelchair. Tommy's voice was thin, weakened by months of treatment, but it was clear and true. And as his voice carried through the arena's sound system, something magical happened. The entire audience, all 70,000 people, began to join in. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It was just 70,000 people, led by an 8-year-old boy battling cancer, singing together with Elvis Presley. "Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go." The voices created a wall of sound that was unlike anything anyone in that arena had ever experienced. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. It was real, raw, and absolutely beautiful. Elvis knelt beside Tommy's wheelchair throughout the entire song, one hand on the boy's shoulder, singing not to the crowd, but to this one brave child who had reminded him why music mattered. When the song ended, the silence lasted for a full 10 seconds. Then the applause began, not the usual screaming and cheering, but something deeper. A standing ovation that seemed to go on forever, punctuated by the sound of thousands of people crying. Elvis hugged Tommy gently, whispered something in his ear that only the boy could hear, and then stood up to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I've performed for presidents and kings, but tonight I performed for royalty. Tommy Martinez reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being human." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "Tommy, you're braver than I'll ever be. And everyone in this room is a little bit braver now because of you. But here's the incredible part of this story. The part that made history. The part that nobody expected. After the concert, Elvis didn't go to his hotel. He didn't attend the after-party. Instead, he went with Tommy and his family to Texas Children's Hospital. He spent the entire night there, visiting every room, singing to children who were too sick to attend the concert. He gave away his rings, his scarves, his personal jewelry to kids who had never expected to see anyone famous, let alone Elvis Presley. At 4 a.m., exhausted but somehow renewed, Elvis sat with Tommy in his hospital room. The boy was tired from the night's excitement, but his eyes were still bright. Mr. Elvis, Tommy said, fingering the TCB necklace. I'm not gonna get better, am I? Elvis took the boy's hand. Tommy, I don't know what's gonna happen. But I know that tonight you showed me something about being brave that I'll never forget. And I'm gonna carry that with me forever. Tommy smiled. Will you remember me? Son, Elvis said, I'll remember you every time I step on a stage. Tommy Martinez passed away 6 weeks later, on February 8, 1977. He was buried wearing Elvis's TCB necklace. When Elvis learned of Tommy's death, he canceled 3 concerts and flew back to Houston for the funeral. He sang, "Love Me Tender," at the service, and established the Tommy Martinez Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Research, funding it with every penny he earned from that tour. 6 months later, Elvis himself would be gone, but the ripple effects of that night in Houston would continue forever. Share this story and subscribe if it touched your heart. Because this is exactly the kind of moment that makes us believe in the power of human connection. The Houston Astrodome concert became legendary, but not for the reasons anyone expected. It wasn't remembered for Elvis's performance or his showmanship. It was remembered for the moment when a superstar forgot his lyrics and found something much more valuable: his humanity. Every subsequent Elvis concert included a moment where he would invite children from local hospitals to attend as special guests. He never again performed "Love Me Tender" without thinking of Tommy Martinez. And he never again took the stage without wearing another TCB necklace, identical to the one buried with a brave 8-year-old boy. After Elvis's death in August 1977, investigators found hundreds of letters in his Graceland bedroom, letters from families of sick children he had visited, thanking him for bringing hope to their darkest moments. But the letter that was framed on his nightstand was from Maria Martinez. "Dear Elvis, Tommy lived 3 months longer than the doctors said he would. He told me it was because he had your strength with him. He wore your necklace every day until he went to sleep for the last time. Thank you for showing my son that heroes are real. You gave him the most beautiful night of his life." The TCB necklace that Elvis wore the night he forgot the lyrics and found his heart sold at auction in 2019 for $2.1 million. The buyer immediately donated it to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, where it's displayed with a simple plaque. Sometimes we find our greatest strength in our most vulnerable moments. Elvis Presley, December 1976. Tommy Martinez would have been 55 years old today. The foundation that bears his name has funded over $200 million in pediatric cancer research. And every year on the anniversary of that Houston concert, children at hospitals around the world sing "Love Me Tender" together, keeping alive the memory of one night when forgetting the words led to remembering what matters most. Elvis Presley forgot his lyrics that night in Houston. But in doing so, he gave us something far more precious than a perfect performance. He gave us a perfect moment of human connection, a reminder that our vulnerabilities can become our greatest strengths, and proof that sometimes the most beautiful music happens not when everything goes right, but when everything falls apart, and we choose love anyway. The ripple effects of that December night continued to shape Elvis's final months. His manager, Colonel Parker, initially worried that the incident would damage Elvis's reputation as a flawless performer. Instead, concert promoters began reporting something unprecedented: sold-out shows with waiting lists specifically requesting the human Elvis they'd heard about. Music critics who had previously dismissed Elvis as merely a spectacle began writing thoughtful pieces about the night the king became human. Rolling Stone magazine later called it the most important 3 minutes in American popular music, not for what was sung, but for what was shared. The Houston Astrodome kept the wheelchair where Tommy had sat that night as a permanent memorial. A small brass plaque was installed. Here sat Tommy Martinez, who reminded a king that courage comes in all sizes. But perhaps the most profound change was in Elvis himself. In his final interviews before his death in August 1977, he spoke repeatedly about that night. "People ask me about my greatest performance," he told a Memphis reporter. "It wasn't 68 Comeback Special. It wasn't Madison Square Garden. It was the night I forgot the words and found myself. The last song Elvis ever performed live, at his final concert in Indianapolis on June 26, 1977 was "Love Me Tender." Witnesses say that before he sang it, he touched his chest where his TCB necklace would have been, closed his eyes for a moment, and whispered something inaudible. Those close enough to the stage later swore they heard him say, "This one's for you, Tommy." When Elvis died 2 months later, among his personal effects was a journal entry dated December 1976. "Forgot my words tonight. Found my purpose instead. Tommy showed me that being strong isn't about never falling down, it's about who you lift up when you're getting back up." Share this story if you believe in the power of compassion. Subscribe for more stories about the moments that make us human.